Okay, Algebra 2, here we go. Today we're going to solve by isolating the variable. So we're going to put into practice all this I stuff and simplifying square root stuff into something where we're actually solving. So we're going to start with the very basics, and that's x squared equals 64. So if you look here at some basic instructions here, you want to get the x squared or parentheses squared by itself. Here we have x squared, it's already by itself. So now we're going to square root both sides. So if we go through that process, we would square root, and so we have square root of x squared is x, and the square root of 64 is 8. But if we think more about this, we have x squared equals 64. So what squared will give us 64? Well, hopefully very quickly you think 8. 8 squared is 64. But what else squared is 64? Okay, that's going to be negative 8. So 8 squared is 64, and negative 8 squared is also 64. So we can have x as 8 or negative 8. Okay, and that's what this step means. Don't forget the positive and the negative. And then we just have a quick, easy way that we write that, and we say x is plus or minus 8. That means x is negative 8 or x is positive 8, and you can write it either way you want. That would be your answer. So same idea on number 2. First, we need to get the x squared, or the parentheses squared, whatever's being squared by itself. So we're going to subtract this 5 from both sides. So now we have x squared equals 810. Now we're going to square root both sides. So if we square root over here and we square root over here, we end up with x squared square rooted is just going to be x. Oh, not squared. Equals positive and negative plus or minus square root of 810. Now in number 1, that 64 happened to be a perfect square. On number 2, it's not, so we need to simplify the square root of 810. Hopefully you see 81 times 10 in here, so we have x equals plus or minus, we could split this into 81 and 10. The square root of 81, well, this is 9, so we have 9 root 10, and we need the positive and the negative of that, so plus or minus 9 root 10. Number 3, same idea, get the x squared by itself, which it is, so we're going to square root both sides. We want to make sure we don't forget the plus and minus, so we have x equals positive or negative root negative 50. So we put in the plus or minus, and now we need to simplify root negative 50. Okay, hopefully I pops into head here, so we need to square root negative 50 is I, that's the square root of the negative, and we can split 50 into 25 and 2. Square root of 50, or square root of 25 is 5. So now we have x equals plus or minus I 5 root 2, which we worked on earlier this week as writing 5i root 2. And we want the positive or negative of that, so we put the plus or minus out front. Okay, let's do some more of these. Now you'll notice the difference here is that these all have parentheses squared, but the process is the same. We're going to get whatever's being squared by itself, and then we're going to square root both sides. So on number 4, we have parentheses squared by itself, and so now we're going to square root both sides. When we take x plus 1 and we square it, then we square root it, we are just left with x plus 1 equals, square root of 100 is 10. We need the positive and the negative of that, so plus or minus 10. Now we've got this extra step here because we haven't solved for x by itself yet. So we're going to subtract 1, so we have x equals, kind of a little mess over here, so let's write it out so that we understand it. We have positive 10 minus 1, and we have negative 10 minus 1. So we get 9 and negative 11. X equals 9 and negative 11. Those two things will work here for X. And you could plug in real quick and check. 9 plus 1 is 10, squared is 100. Negative 11 plus 1 is negative 10, squared is 100. Okay, number 5. First step is to get whatever's being squared, get this thing by itself. So to do that, we're going to subtract 4 from both sides. So we have x plus 2 quantity squared equals 48. Once we get whatever's being squared by itself, we're going to square root both sides. X plus 2 squared square rooted is just x plus 2. And now we want to account for the positive and the negative, so we get plus or minus root 48. Now the next step, we can either subtract the 2 to solve for x, or we can simplify the square root 48. Whatever order you do it in doesn't matter. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and subtract the 2 from both sides. So we have x equals, now the proper order to write this in is negative 2 plus or minus root 48. So negative 2 first, plus or minus root 48. And then hopefully you see here that we can simplify root 48. So we get x equals negative 2 plus or minus root 48 can be square root 16 square root 3. What's the square root of 16? Well, we know that this is 4. So now we have x equals negative 2 plus or minus 4 root 3. Done. You cannot combine the negative 2 and the plus or minus 4 because the 4 is attached to the root 3, so those have to stay together. Okay, last notes, and then you'll be on to your video examples. We are going to do number 6 here. X minus 5 quantity squared is negative 27. So again, we need to get the parentheses squared by itself, which it is. Then we are going to square root both sides to free up that quantity squared there. So x minus 5 squared square rooted is just x minus 5 equals plus or minus square root negative 27. So we need to add 5. We also need to simplify the square root negative 27. So I'm going to go ahead and add 5 first. So we get x equals, and the proper order, if you remember from the previous problem, is to write this as 5 plus or minus root negative 27. So we solved for x. We have x by itself. Now we just need to simplify it. So simplify root 27. We're going to write 5 plus or minus. This is going to be I. And we're going to split 27 into 9 and 3. And the square root of 9 is 3. So we're going to write this in the correct order, which is 5 plus or minus 3i root 3. And we are finished. Okay, next we're going to look at, we have 4 video examples here. So this is where you're going to pause, and we will go over these in class tomorrow.